In the recording. This phone is now live. This phone is taking notes. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Q&A. I'm TJ, a specialist in highly gifted education, and for all you parents that have joined us today, I'll be in the classrooms taking over Mr. Joost's classes because as of a few hours ago, Mr. Joost is also a new daddy with a new healthy baby boy. So if you run into him, wish him well from us because he's going to get some sleepless nights, not because of us this time, but because of kids, of course. So very happy to hear us getting all that. So yeah, today, the Q&A. I want to start off a little bit different than what we normally do, because what we're going to be talking about today is what we call affective time when we work with the kids, and it has a lot to do with social emotional development. So I want to take a little bit of time for all of you parents to try and type as many words for emotions as you think you know in the chat, right? So just type things like happy, angry, and then any of the other emotions that you know. And as I will explain a few things, we'll come back to that a little bit later and see how well you guys do compared to how well our kids do, generally speaking, in our classes. So please type as many words as you can in the chat as we speak. Okay, so while that's going on, I'm going to talk a little bit about the effective time and what that means, right? So why is effective time so important for gifted kids? Now, we've spoken a bit last week about the of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what that is basically, sorry, I'm running out of space, is a framework that we use in our classes a lot to help our kids move up towards what is the ultimate goal, self-actualization, right? So we've spoke a bit about how physiological needs, so things like air, water, and then procreation is actually part of that too, are the first bit that people need. Shelter is part of that too. So when you're dropped on a desert island, the first thing that we need to fulfill before we can think of anything else, right? So is physiological needs. Kind of logical, like we're not going to really talk about mathematical equations and stuff when you're worried about starving, right? So that's the first one. Safety needs, which is all about personal security, and personal security in a setting for humans has a lot to do with how we are perceived with other humans, right? So threats nowadays tend to come from other humans, no longer from other animals as such. But basically, seeing the social animals that we are, safety needs like personal security, and in today's age, like employment, resources, and health are also kind of important. But in terms of where we talked about with our kids, the safety needs are a lot around feeling safe at home. Now, and then the love and belonging is effectively the element of social needs. So social needs is where a lot of our happiness sits. Like, do we feel like we have people that care about us? Do we have meaningful interactions with them? And essentially for these first three areas, what we say in Passend is that this is where we look for people being happy. So here we get to the emotional side of things again, right? So in order to be happy, we need four things, which is physical health, mental health, responsibility, and agency. Like if you have all four of those things, we know that happiness works. The next two rungs, which are esteem, and esteem is effectively you learning things. So this is where learning happens, and particularly compared to what other people think you have learned, right? So self-esteem is the bit that you look at, but you can't have self-esteem without esteem because you are comparing against others, right? So status, respect, strength, freedom, All these things are really important. And what most schools tend to do is they tend to focus on this bit, and unfortunately, they skip this bit in the middle. Right, so a lot of schools do not take enough time to talk about love and belonging, and then focus straight away on like what respect is and so on. And because the way Maslow's hierarchy works is you have to hit these rungs before you can move on to the next, right? You cannot skip this unless you get kids that struggle. Now, in some forms of these models, these rungs sort of like bleed into the next. So that's why it sometimes feels like, okay, we are okay. But when we try to help these kids, but if you're really good at identifying where their needs are being met and when they're not, you can actually understand where kids are struggling. So for us, this is where we see that there's autonomy, right? So autonomy is basically for us the idea that if you want to get esteem and self-esteem, you have to be able to continuously work on this, right? So, and you need to be able to do this on your own, because if you only rely on your parents telling you what to do or teachers telling you what to do, you'll end up in a situation where the esteem doesn't become self-esteem. And that is really difficult for them to then move on to the next rung. Right, so that's the autonomy bit. And then the last bit is the self-actualization. This is the golden standard where, like, if everything else is done all right, you should be able to really reflect on what you're doing, what you're achieving, and start working for yourself, right? The self-actualization bit. And this is where we see success, right? Because anybody that is successful can do it on its own. And the way I tend to explain it to the kids is that, like, the aim of education and everything that we do is about basically creating a good future for yourself. That's one of the reasons why parents are so concerned with what kind of education you're getting. And the way that is often measured is like, how good of a job prospect do you have? And what I like to do is I like to break that down for the kids towards like, what is a job really? And a job is basically a representation of you having the ability to give your valuable time in exchange for other people's valuable time. And we use money as a measurement tool in this. So success, people say, is money, but actually money itself, right, is actually not really what success, what is the important thing. The idea being that if I do something that is so basic that anybody could do it, people will pay me for my time on an hourly basis. So if I sweep the streets, and that's the only thing I'm doing, which anybody that basically has arms and legs to be able to walk around and sweep the streets can do, you get a basic minimum wage. If you can do something that other people can't, and a good example of this is, for example, being a plumber, then people are willing to pay you for that expertise more. Like anybody could unclog a pipe or even do some DIY kind of stuff at home. Given enough time, given the right tools, given the right amount of perseverance. But if I have studied to be a plumber and I've got better tools and better experience, I can do it much faster. And therefore, that is worth more time because I can do this job in 1 hour. If I do it, it might cost me 2 days. Well, that means I'm willing to pay more for it. And as you go up the ladder in more difficult work, things that take more time to study or require more specific tools and experiences, people pay you more. And one of the ways I tell the kids, like, how do you make sure that you're safe from being overtaken by AI, is actually become an expert in 3 fields. Used to be that people said become an expert in 1 field, that would be enough. But nowadays, like, sometimes your field becomes completely obsolete. And so it's a risky strategy. But if you take a field that you're in and you're better than about 95% of the population at that field, and then you add a second field, the actual specialization becomes multiplicative. Right. So it isn't just like, oh, then it's like 79.2, but no, it's actually you'll become a much smaller percentile of people that have that particular set of skills. If you add a third, it actually becomes quite mind-boggling big, right? So you can have from becoming like 1 in 20 or 1 in 40 kind of person that can do a job, you become maybe like a 1 in 1,000 person that can do a job, and then you become a 1 in 1,000,000 kind of person that can do that job. Now, even a 1 in 1,000,000 job, there's quite a few thousands and millions of people that can still do your job, right? So it doesn't completely cover you in that sense. But if it's rather unlikely that all three of the things you've chosen tend to be completely replaced at the same time, particularly if you're quite clever about like what you want to do. An example for this is like you could be an engineer, which in Malaysia you're like kind of a dime a dozen. There's a lot of people. I always have this joke: if you throw a rock, you'll hit an engineer, and it will bounce off a doctor, and then it will hit a lawyer. Right? That's how we run into people that get ready for education. But there's not that many engineers specialized in agriculture, for example. And then if you then say, okay, and I'm also an engineer specialized in drone technology, all of a sudden, if you were to have those three particular skills, you would basically be able to get any kind of job you want in Malaysia right now. Right? But if then drones become a little bit too easy to use, like you can reskill into something that is maritime, for example. So how do you, and then you can do things again. Right? So it's a safe strategy, and that self-actualization section that we want the kids to fall into is to understand like, okay, I need to get better at, handling learning stuff. But this learning thing is hard, right? Like being able to identify what I really like, what I'm good at, that is tough. And then with gifted kids, we know that they struggle with emotional development, and we also know that they struggle with what we call asynchronous development. Right. So because a lot of the gifted kids struggle in the love and belonging section, they often come up with a lot of strategies to not have to deal with it. Right. So this is when either they completely avoid social situations, or they look for older individuals to make sure that they don't have to deal with the kids in the same age groups. And as a result, they become a little bit unskilled in the social bit. And one of the three things that you can focus on to become an expert is become really good at being social. In fact, it's probably the only thing that AI won't really be able to touch in the meantime. But a lot of the kids we work with really struggle with this concept. And then a lot of people think that any gifted person is automatically bad at being social, and that's just not true. We know that this stuff is often learned behavior, right? So this is where affective time comes in, because why are we doing this? So what are the three things that we focus on? Well, we focus on their social ability, right? So how good are they at communicating, working together, give or take? One thing that I see that is very problematic, like normally what you need for this is play. And unfortunately, play is really hard to do in Malaysia. And ironically, the higher up in the like B40 to M40 to T20, the demographics we look, we see that actually the T20s struggle with play even more. Few reasons for this is that there's not a lot of access to playgrounds. So some parents are kind of afraid for kids to just roam around and let them explore the neighborhoods. And I understand with the lack of walking abilities and other kind of fears, I understand where it all comes from. But the net effect of it is that the kids just don't play as much. Of course, we had the COVID generation that have had like really long isolation and really key times of their development, right? So they didn't learn how to play as much, and then there's a lot of kids that don't have siblings or only one, and you need, like when we always say three is a party, but also the three is most likely to get into fights. Like that actually, as far as siblings are concerned, is a good thing. That like having multiple people that you have to take into consideration when you're playing is really important. Now, the playground facilities itself in Malaysia seem to be lacking a little bit. Funny enough, they're often way too safe. And I know that sounds odd, but a good playground should allow kids to sort of, at its worst, be able to break an arm. And at its, but if it's like, because that's, if it's, the worst that can happen is break an arm. Technically, it's okay. Like the kids aren't going to die from that. My son broke his arm in what was considered a free playground a few months ago, within one day after getting the cast, he was running around and all that kind of stuff again. But like learning what the limits of your fear and ability are is an important part of play as well. Like, okay, how do I overcome like doing difficult or scary things sometimes? And so the play part is missing a lot. We are going to deal a little bit like what we do in our classes with play, but not for this session, because effective time doesn't deal with the play part specifically. It is an important difference there. Like when we talk about emotional stuff and social stuff, there is a little bit more to it than just play, right? Because there's also what we call values. And I will go into that a little bit later. Now, the emotional stuff that we tend to work on with the kids is I just asked you guys to type in a bunch of words, right, in the chat, and we have joy, present, proud, confidence, scared, anxiety, happiness, embarrassment, anger, fear, frustration, melancholy, hesitance, right, which is also a fear. So we've got a few like words, but I find that even with the adults, this is just scratching the surface. So a lot of times when I work with parents and talk to them about how do you feel, it's almost like there's a lack of the vocabulary to really describe how some of the feelings, where they sit. And I'll show you a little bit later like how we help the kids to understand this. Now, and the last bit about effective time is to deal with habits, whether positive or negative. And one of the things that I feel is really powerful when it comes to habits is that you can use them for your benefit, but if you don't know how habit formation works, it can be really detrimental. Right, so we always talk about like the sum of your habits when we talk to people, but we don't really teach kids in schools how to build habits, and then we let them form. And there is some habits that society-wise we've become really good at, like teaching kids how to brush their teeth, because it's one of those things that everybody that has like a little bit of responsibility in terms of parenting knows that we have to teach kids how to brush their teeth. We do that consistently, and it's one of those habits that if you look at like what kind of an annoying thing brushing your teeth is, to be like, if you logically look at it, is you take something that is a little bit irritable to your gums with something that doesn't taste particularly well. You have to really get used to it, like to the point that we make fake fluoride style kind of toothpaste for kids that doesn't taste like the real thing we want you to use, for example. And we get people to do this on a daily basis to a point where people don't even think about it anymore. It becomes like a standard ritual when you wake up, right? So we have the ability as a society to build really good habits, but we just don't do it. And then like except for maybe Japanese schools, right, we don't really focus a lot on habits past preschool. And even in Malaysia, I noticed that the last 1 or 2 years in preschool tend to focus a lot on academics, not a lot on actual learning habits and play habits for that matter. So this is why we need to work with the kids. And why does this matter for gifted kids? Well, because gifted kids build habits quicker than other kids. And unfortunately, if somebody builds a habit quicker without guidance, they can actually build bad habits pretty quickly. And then they ingrain, and then things can become harder to correct later on. This is one of the reasons why that early first 6 years is so important for all kids, but for gifted kids, that we actually have to move that forward. And when we start working with kids, generally speaking, we only start working with them in standard 1 or 2. Actually, a lot of our kids have already built up a lot of poor habits that actually make it harder for him or her for them to actually cope with school. So that's the why part, right? So who do we do it for, right? So who's involved with all of this? Well, when it comes to effective time, the biggest powerful tool that we have when it comes to gifted education is what we call peer classes. Now, peer classes, obviously we have to define that a little bit. For us, this is kids with the same with an equal level of thought. And this is not kids that are the same age. So it's not age. Very important. When you identify kids only on their age group, what we tend to see is that there is definitely a lot of differences. In kids, even when you have kids that come in because of the cutoff date for when the school starts and so on, there's so much differences in a development. But like the way that the home situation works has a massive impact on that. And then whenever you see that like kids can have different levels in a class, just imagine that being gifted is just a multiplier on that. So what the differences we see in a normal kids are exacerbated from just being gifted, right? So peers in gifted groups can be sometimes 4 or 5 years apart, depending on the level of intelligence, IQ, or the neurodiversity that they have, right? So peers are really important because one of the things I joke I would say to parents is like, look, if you as a parent tell your kids to do something, they will often only listen after like 3 or 4 times. If a teacher tells them that we need like 2 or 3 times, but if a peer tells them to do something, they'll do it the first time around, right? So if we can find peers with the same kind of value system, then they're much better to get the kids to act in the way that we'd like. Now, we also need that with school, right? So one of the things about being social beings is that the way that we behave changes based on the circumstances around us. And you as an adult will probably change the way you act with your family versus people at work versus people in school. Like we put on masks basically. And what I like about working sometimes with twice exceptional kids on the spectrum is that they struggle with understanding the nuance between when a situation is appropriate and when it isn't for certain kind of behaviors. And they really make you look at like, ooh, okay, so saying hi is different in certain situations. What do I do? Like, how do I make it clear when it's appropriate to say hi and what kind of tone? All these things seem very natural to most people, but for a lot of asynchronously developed in highly gifted kids, they sometimes completely miss the mark in what they're supposed to have learned from it because they may be too observant. They see more details and then they start questioning stuff. And then just the way how we respond to it can make them go, okay, then I don't want to try anymore, right? Because we sort of, when we mask a lot of the stuff, is like sometimes we even lie outright, and some of our gifted kids pick up on this, and then they'll ask a question like that in the wrong situation. I'm sure you've had situations where some of your gifted kids ask a really embarrassing question in a kind of a social situation, and how you then deal with that curiosity can have an impact on stuff. And that's basically the idea that happens in school, and it happens also in the family. So that's what the effective time tends to target. But of course, we work with the kids. So what we tend to do is we need to teach them how to observe and understand the school and the family rules, right? So that is where we want to go. So what is it we're trying to do, right? So like I'll give you guys a few examples of what we do in our classes. And these tend to be 4 week arcs that we go through with the kids to help them understand these particular things. So some of the core elements, and there's a lot more small nuanced things around that because every class is so different, and we adjust what we need to each of the kids, and we ask the kids what they want to talk about. But one of the first things that we do when we get the kids to come in is we start talking about values versus rules. A big complaint from a lot of parents is that the kids tend to be so literal with their rules that it's really hard for them to sort of, like follow rules in general. Right? So it's like, oh yeah, but like they always see exceptions, or they keep challenging the rules. Like, what is happening here? Like, how do we deal with that? And that's because we sort of understand that rules tend to be based on certain kind of values that are underlying. And when you bring up too many rules, you don't really you can't remember them. Like, how many of you know the entire law book? Like, I'm guessing like there might be a few lawyers among you, but even you will probably have clerks looking at like cases and stuff like that. So it's almost physically impossible for a single person to memorize the entire law in Malaysia or in any land for that country for that matter. So what we tend to operate on is values that technically shouldn't be breaking any kind of rules or laws, but when we tell kids, obviously because they still have to learn a lot of these rules and definitely have to learn these values, we tend to give them rules, and then they break a value. And then as far as the gifted kids are concerned, they didn't break a rule, but because they broke a value, they still got into trouble. So that understanding is something that we have to go through in a very playful kind of manner, and it depends on what age group the kids are in. And what is really cool about values is that they're kind of relative towards the group that you're in. So if you're in a church, your values would be different than if you would be in a mosque, simply because of the religions that you would have, right? But even if like you compare that to the values in maybe your in-laws from your husband's side or from your wife's side, their values might be completely different. So every group of people normally comes up with some form of values that are passed down. And when you get these gifted kids that are different ages, sometimes like different groups, like we have to start with understanding what these values are. And then we kind of throw them a little bit in the deep end, where we let them come up with their own and let them run into consequences of values that they don't uphold. We have a lot of fun materials, particularly for the young kids, where we use the Knights of the Round Table as a way to do creative writing and comic book writing around values and how to learn those, because like being a bit geeky is kind of fun. But like we traditionally used to do this a lot with things like fairy tales and so on. But like what we do is we tend to fold these into making things. So every class is making a shield with values on them in terms of icons. So like how knights used to have those kind of icons, like if you'd have an owl, then that would represent wisdom. So the Greeks had this. So the official icon of Athens was an owl. The Spartans had their version of it, and so on. Right. So you can look at like good values from ancient times, and there's a lot of like Japanese had these on their all the houses have their own icons that represent certain kind of virtues and values. So there's a lot of history lessons that we throw in here, but the goal is to actually help understand this. Now, the next one is then once we have established values, that allows us in our classes to start working together. Because if we don't work on that, the kids might be all over the place. They might not understand each other, right? So that's after that, we're going to work on the emotions. And emotions are kind of separate from the actions that we take. A lot of kids and parents actually misunderstand that there's a difference between feeling angry and shouting. Like we tend to, when people shout at people, for example, we say, "Oh, he's angry. He's angry." He's like, yes, he's angry, and he's choosing to shout at somebody, right? So the action taken is not the same as the actual emotions, but the emotions are what triggers the actions. So and the emotions often are triggered by external factors as well. And then a lot of our kids don't really understand all this nuance. So one example, we had a few emotions that you guys had. Now let's have a look. This is an emotion wheel that we sometimes use in classes. And what we do is really fun with our kids is we get them to make these. So we use Post-it notes and things like that. And then we actually make our own version of it that we then give the kids, that allows them to be used as a way to identify what am I really feeling when things are happening. Right. So emotion wheels are great tools. There's a lot of stuff in there. What is really fun is that a lot of people don't know this. If you ever watched the movie Inside Out, there is all these emotions in there. So we have sadness, we have happiness, we have anger, we have disgust, we have fear, and then there's technically a sixth emotion, which is surprised. And that's kind of cool because the surprise emotion is actually in that movie. Whoever saw the movie, it's the elephant at the end, right? And as we get more and more in control of our emotions, surprise becomes less and less of an emotion to deal with, which is kind of a sad thing because basically surprise is in combination with all the other emotions actually kind of wonderful, right? So little thing that we talk to with the kids about. But one of the big things, once the kids know what these emotions are, we use them in discussions in our classes a lot. And this is where we use tools like clay, art to draw things. And some of that is designed for the kids to sit still, and some of it is to really think about what we're talking about. But like, this is a tip that I like to give for people at home. Obviously, talking about emotions is hard. Listening to emotions is also hard for a lot of people, but getting the kids to open up seems to be difficult. I've got a lot of I had a question today about how can I get my kid motivated, and it all starts with getting the kids to share with you how they really feel. But a lot of parents tell me, like, if I'm asking my kids to share anything, they just don't. They just shut down. And there's a few reasons why that happens. First of all, often asking them to talk about difficult situations in the school triggers the emotion. They get really defensive, and that's it. Also, some of the kids don't feel that they're constantly being interrogated, right? So they're feeling very uncomfortable with that. And you have to imagine that, like, asking a kid to talk about difficult stuff makes them more anxious. And then if they're not doing anything to distract them, it's really hard to deal with that emotion. And that isn't unique to young kids, by the way. You'd be very surprised how important it is, if I want the teens to open up, that I have to bring these things out. So what can you do at home that really works? Well, keep their hands busy. So gifted kids have what we call an overexcitability towards certain things, towards emotion, also towards psychomotor overexcitability. So their brains are firing on all cylinders. It needs something to do. And if we deny them that stuff, they actually struggle to maintain their focus. That's why they start walking around. That's why they build tics and start doing things. Right. So what we do is keep hands busy. And there's a few ways that you can do that. So you can start drawing something together, right? So just say, you know what, let's draw something. Origami is really nice as well. Like, so if the kids like origami, like, maybe you can say, okay, once every day for a half hour, we're going to just fold some origami together. And the idea is, in the beginning, we don't talk about school or anything at all. We just get started with the thing. Clay is very nice, like the air dry clay, particularly, that you can get online. It costs 5 ringgit for like 36 bags of clay. It's really awesome to use. You can make really a lot of fun stuff with it. If you have 3D printers at home, building some stuff there. But basically, doing some kind of arts and crafts stuff together is really good, right? So the idea is you, step one is like, start an arts thing, whatever that is. Step two, about like 5 to 10 minutes in, and this is kind of important. Like, if they're doing something that they like, they normally, after like 5 or 10 minutes, they will get into a little bit of a flow state. So they start to, like, things sort of move around. You're no longer distracted, and you can see them calm down a bit, right? Because there's a very meditative thing towards it. For the parents that have the luxury of a little bit of Warhammer, for the boys, particularly, with a lot of the girls lately as well. Those are great as well. So painting figurines together, things like that. So after 5 or 10 minutes, you start to talk. And then you'll be surprised. They will start talking. This is really magical. Like, so, and then let them flow around what they want to talk about. And just the act of doing this a few times builds like a shared experience, which then creates more trust. Trust is built by just having prolonged periods of interaction with people. And it is really sad that for a lot of parents, like the quality time, like the idea of quality time, often is like things that are so distracted that they're not, like, so watching a movie together is not the same. Watching a movie together and then afterwards talking about it, that the quality time is the talking part, right? So that is that's important. Start art/quality time, let's call it like that, right? And they will start to talk. Now, when they start to talk, what you want to do is ask them how they feel. And this is why we do so much with these emotion wheels, and why it will be good for you yourself as a parent to look at the emotion wheels that you could find, maybe make your own together with your kids, because you being able to understand the difference between between annoyed and infuriated, or jealous and violated, like those things are very, very different. The reason, like, English is a really nice language where we have a lot of different words for different emotions. So this is a good medium to do that in. Ironically, Chinese itself can be a bit tricky in this, because a lot of characters have dual meanings in terms of emotions, right? So it needs a little bit more context if you talk about stuff. So if you are, and I believe it's the same for Korean and Japanese and so on. Like, I'm still learning a little bit of Bahasa, so it's a little bit tricky for me to make a comment on that part. But like, what language you choose to communicate this in does make a difference. So for those with all our multicultural backgrounds, like, it would be really worth to see what the version of this is in your own respective language, if that's the thing. And of course, what is the language your kids like to communicate most in? Right. So how do they feel? And if you get really good at like having the same language and the same understanding about this again creates that shared experience, which is really good. Now, and this is optional, so I'm going to put it in brackets, is like, ask them, how can I help? One of the things with, and this is as husbands, fathers, like, we have to be really mindful of, is that sometimes the act of just sharing what you really feel about stuff is more than enough for people to know what they need to do. And you can actually trust your kids a lot more in this, because, like, if they actually got exploring different ways to deal with this, that's a much better state. That is the autonomous learner there and then, like somebody who's trying to figure it out. And what you want to create at home is a situation where they feel they can make emotional mistakes without the repercussions of punishments right away, which will then have an impact on how they will self-reflect and look at, like, challenges that they need to deal with the learning bits in school. Right. So don't forget, like, I'll just bring it back to where we were. The issue is here, the love and belonging parts. That's stopping them from progressing upwards. Right. That's not happening because a lot of them feel stuck. And this is really important for those that have teens with me that are in our program, because we've only been operating in Malaysia for a very short period of time, relatively. I've got a lot of teens that are really, really, really struggling at the moment. And they are now in this really high anxiety kind of situation with exams and all that kind of stuff. And so they have to sort of learn all of this stuff at the same time as they have to get ready for exams and stuff like that. And then there's a lot of pressure on the self-esteem and the esteem part from everybody around us, because everybody's doing exams at the same time, right? So there's like, it's one of the reasons why in education, particularly in Finland and in the Netherlands, we don't do any exam kind of stuff until they're 12. Because we believe in the Netherlands, focusing on this particular kind of development is much, much, much more important, right? And once people understand that that's what's happening, a lot of people that have, like, their worries about, like, oh, like, they're trying to implement this in the national curriculum in Malaysia as well. But obviously, you need to also help parents understand what we're doing here. So there is, like, all of this comes down from psychology and educational, like, research over long periods of time. So the strategy with this is very, very clear. The bits that you as a parent have to manage is a little bit the FOMO, the fear of missing out, like for those, which is, there will be some parents that have kids that are maybe doing well academically, and they go, oh, I got this score. And it's like, oh, man, I'm feeling worried. I have to help my kids with this. But at the end of the day, if your kids can self-correct, they will be able to leapfrog any of these kids that are just waiting for input from their parents, right? So you're playing the long game here, and trusting that process is really, really important. Okay, so that is a bit on that thing here. One thing that we do that's a lot of fun with the kids is kind of like neuro-linguistic programming. And don't worry, we're not brainwashing your children. The neuro-linguistic programming can be a little bit controversial, but one of the things that I find very useful in neuro-linguistic programming is taking very difficult concepts like procrastination and stuff, and creating a situation around that makes it easy to remember, right? So when you come and tell kids, okay, like procrastination, we is obviously they all know it's bad. Um, so what we do, we have this special game that we do, which is the dark playground. We get the kids to analyze themselves and like what are the things that they procrastinate with. What are the things that distract them? What are the things that keep them busy, like make them lose time? Like, and the kids know this. Like when you ask them, like, what do you think? They'll be able to quickly list it. And then we start talking about like, okay, what are strategies to deal with this? And one example of this is we use these hexagons. For those ones that went to our showcase the other day might have seen this. And we basically got kids to make like these little roadways on them that connect to each other. You can make like a big board game out of it that you can connect. And in the middle, they'll put things that are procrastination, like PlayStation Town or whatnot. So they're all like little clay versions of this, and it becomes a really nice looking field. And then we have what we call the panic monster, which are the things that make them panically like deal with things like, okay, I have exam monster, or like, my mom shouting at me, whatever the things are that make them like stop procrastinating and doing the things that they need to do. And they'll make a representation of that. And then we make game rules. The kids come up with their own rules from those components. They're normally really fun, clever little rules. And they're all about like, okay, how do I avoid my procrastination habit? How do I deal with the panic monster and all that stuff? And it's all kind of fun. But it's a really, like, we take almost 4 weeks talking about this stuff, and they go through worksheets on this, and they get a lot of understanding of what their own challenges are. And then once we have all that, and we call that game the dark playground, the next time we see a kid procrastinate, the only thing we have to do is tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, you're in your dark playground. And 4 weeks of analyzation of challenges and strategies to deal with it comes flooding back in. And you see the kids go, oh yeah, like I'm going to do this. And it basically becomes this language between the kids and ourselves to talk about like habits that we don't want to do. And it makes it so that when they initiate a habit, we can stop it from happening without it turning it into like almost like a personal attack, right? Because this is one of those challenges when it comes to dealing with habits. Like once your habit is sort of ingrained, it is really hard to deal with it. Like that's why people sometimes struggle like not eating at night or sleeping on time and stuff like that. Like we as adults struggle with that a lot, and for kids this is not different. So we use neuro-linguistic programming to help the kids with that. But I mean, obviously neuro-linguistic programming can be a little bit controversial, as I just said. So we make sure it always comes from the ideas of the kids themselves. And the last thing that we do is we do mindfulness. Now, mindfulness takes a few forms in our classes. So we do these mindfulness drawings. If you want to go down a fun rabbit hole of things you could do, maybe even as little art with your kids, you can just go online and do mindfulness drawings. And there's lots of little patterns and stuff that people can draw, and they're almost like a great way to reduce the stress in your head. So that's one way that we work with them, and it's just a fun little reward exercise to do at the end of a lesson. Another version of that is where and maybe you guys have seen it, we ask the kids to draw this figure 8 with one hand, and then we ask them to, in a different color, to do it with your left hand. And then basically for a minute, you keep drawing that, and then you get this pattern. And we do this with both right and left hands. It helps them with activating more neural pathways between the different sides of the brain. And eventually, we're going to ask them to sort of, with two hands, draw like a house. So you'll start off with like a house with your right hand, and then you'll at the same time you draw it with your left hand, for example. Like I don't know, like there's lots of things in there that we do to help the kids to build these kind of things. So that's the kind of mindfulness drawings we tend to do at the end of the class. But we also do meditation with the kids. There's different versions of this, so it's not religious meditation. Very important. It's just the act of controlling your breathing and particularly helping them understand what meditation really is. And a lot of kids, when I ask them, and particularly the teens that I work with, really struggle with this. So I ask them like, okay, do you know how to meditate? And they're like, no, I'm terrible at meditation. Like if I tried it once and it didn't work. And so then you ask them, why didn't it work? So, well, I sort of had too many thoughts and everything else. And what people don't understand when it comes to meditation is like, that's what it's supposed to do. Right? So you're supposed to meditate because you are trying to run into those voices in your head. Like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that. But because one of the things, particularly nowadays with all the devices and things like that, our minds are kind of overloaded and they're looking for ways to deal with that anxiety. So that, like, there's little habits of like doing things here, there. That's what the procrastination stuff is a lot about as well. And actually, like what you want is you want to get better at sort of not responding to those impulses. And there's not a mind that is really overloaded and addicted to dopamine, like most of our minds are, really struggles with just sitting still and closing your eyes and breathing for 5 minutes, because it's the exact opposite what our brains wants to do. And the game is to try and acknowledge that these thoughts and like anxiousness happen and try to get back into like just breathe in, breathe out, think of that. And as you do that, you get used to that like anxious feeling of like I want to do stuff, or the little itchiness on your hands that comes with meditating. And then eventually the kids can go from like 1 minute to 2 minutes to even 10 minutes. Like that's normally where we leave it, because if they want to do more than that, we tell them you can do that at home. But basically, it's normally when we start with our kids, they can't even do 30 seconds. Over time, they can do like 5 to 10 minutes, and it allows them to reset their dopamine urges so that they can commit to tasks. There's this idea now, if you want to get work done, you do wall staring, which is kind of the same thing. You take all the distractions away, and then if you feel the urge to do something else, you go sit in front of a wall and you go look at the wall for like 10 minutes until your brain goes, this is so mind-numbingly boring, let's do something else. And then you negotiate with your brain, say, okay, either I look at the wall or I'm going to do the work I'm supposed to do. And then your brain will go, let's do the work. And then that would be the fun thing to do. It's kind of magical, works really well, but it requires a little bit of help with some of the kids as well. So that is the mindfulness that we work on with them. And that is kind of in a nutshell, like what we do in our affective times, right? So there's a lot more things that we do, but I wanted to explain to you guys like how we take this time. We normally spend about 45 minutes on these kind of sessions in our class. And the kids really enjoy them. They take the form of conversation, so it's really good about like getting your thoughts and ideas out. It's like mini presentations, like it's really a classroom discussion in a sense, which like it's nice because we have these smaller groups of like 10 kids, so the kids feel that they're being heard. And then yeah, that's they're really fun to work with the kids, and it's one of those things where you see the kids go like, wow, this is I'm being listened to, and that love and belonging part really works. So that's that. So if you have any questions about this particular bit, please put it in the chat, and then I'll take the time to answer a question that I got today about specifically a child that is 10 years old and he's been rejecting school since he was 9. And how can he help them? And why do they reject school at this age, right? So that is actually, a lot of that is related to what we're talking about today, because it's either one of a few things, right? I don't have full information about this boy, but there's normally a few things, particularly when it comes to gifted kids in this. A very common one is that the kids are bored in school. Right, so understimulated is the other word. So the things that he's dealing with are too easy, which means they're dealing with an anxiety. Like when we do stuff that is too easy, we feel really scared. Funny enough, like being bored doesn't feel good. Now, being bored itself isn't a bad thing. It normally is a good motivator to get to do other stuff. The problem is in school, the kids often aren't allowed to do other stuff. They have to do things that the teacher wants them, that the class is working on. So it's essentially a lack of agency. Now, there's two ways to help him with that problem. One is to help him understand how to advocate constructively for more agency, which often involves doing the work that needs to be done so that they can work on something that they enjoy more. Right. So that is a process on its own. But like the important part with that is you have to find out with the kids, okay, is it like, are you bored or are you not? Now, if you don't know which one it is, like doing the thing I just told you about, a little bit of art project, getting him to talk about how he feels about it is really important, right? So you can do this at home. As they're in our classes, they'll get better and better at like voicing this, and these conversations can be deeper, right? So being understimulated, really important thing. It could also be that they have some social challenges in the class. So potentially they feel that they can't connect with the kids in their class, either because they're academically doing okay and are more advanced, but socially they would like to hang out with older kids, so they feel left out. And therefore they don't feel comfortable in school. So that's a thing that could be a problem. And part of that again is where our effective time comes in, because like in effective time we do talk about like, okay, like what do you guys want to do in the playground? Like how do you find friends? Things like that. Like and how do you mask feelings when it's appropriate? Because everybody masks. It's really important to know. Like if you are going to the Sultan, you are going to probably dress up in a way that you would never would have dressed up normally. You normally speak a different kind of bahasa, right? Like as I understand it, there's like an ancient bahasa, and if you imagine like speaking that the whole day, it feels kind of tiring probably at the end of it. So it's like these kind of things are appropriate, they're necessary. You might even like some of you might even be on time for that thing. As and I'll be honest, like I've Malaysianized a lot. It's like my time frame being a bit more flexible nowadays. But basically, like we change how we behave in the situation that we are, and that comes at a cost of emotionally draining ourselves. So there could be an element of that happening in the child. And so I think the main thing with this particular question, and I hope that the parent who asked the question is here, is we need to first find out what is really going on, right? And that means you need to be able to sit down with them, ask them to open up, and then ask them, okay, like, how do you want some help? Now, I do want to say, in terms of like what we can do to help with the masking a little bit, again, this is about like recognizing that masking is appropriate at some points, right? Because we have urges and will have urges too that they try to avoid. So again, you need to be kind of like a calm rock at home. Like what is it that you can do to create that situation? And do you have the tools? Do you have, what can you do to get ready as a parent to do this? Let me see. I see another question in here. Let me see what that is. Okay, so that's a very good question, because it actually like comes in this, like, how do we recognize these kids' achievements? Can they? We can't say that they're smart because they know that already. So the real answer to that is, and this is a very strong positive discipline approach, but also one related to growth mindset, is never ever recognize the result. Only recognize the effort, right? And that language like that is like the younger they are, the more important that is, right? So a lot of gifted kids, they'll start to get addicted to showing off, like and we catch this very early on in our assessment with the kids, particularly when they play these games where they do a level which is a very easy level. Look, I'm done. Look, I'm done. Like, and they announce it, and if we pretend to not listen, they come and actually ask for that affirmation with us. And that is learned behavior, because when a kid is young, gifted kids often like start reading when they're 2, 3 years old, and then people go, oh, I was reading already, and they notice this because they understand language earlier, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm getting recognition, right? So the thing is actually them cleverly understanding how to read is really not the habit that you want to emphasize. The habit you want to emphasize is them taking time to read more than most, or being trying to be polite, or trying to do work. Right. So change your phrasing when it comes to this stuff to when they come and show you a drawing. Don't ever say, and this is hard. I understand it's hard. Don't say, "Well done. That is beautiful." Just ask them, "Oh, like how did you do that?" Like, let them talk about what they did. So, I did this and this and this. So, okay, yeah, I saw you were working really hard on that. I really like that. Like, how did that make you feel? That's a good question to ask. How did it make you feel? Oh yeah, I really enjoyed painting that. I enjoy you. I like how you enjoyed painting that. I would love to see you do that more. And then their skills will become the thing. And I've done this with my daughter, who likes to do a lot of art. And again, you have to trust the process in this, because like initially a few times he said to me, "How come you never say I did something really nice?" And I said, "Well, because I care about how hard you work on things. Like, if you give something your all, and even if you don't do it right, I like that." Um, and that's the important part. Like, how much effort have you got left to do, right? And I want you to enjoy painting. And now she paints all the time, to the point where when she finished painting something, she often just doesn't even keep it. She throws it away. And we ran into like an art teacher at one of our events, and she was there, and she had some art with her that she was drawing, and she went. I told the art teacher, "Yeah, my daughter is drawing quite a bit." She said, "Oh, can I see what she had?" And then my daughter was like, "Yeah, here's some stuff," and she sort of threw it at her. It's like, because she didn't care about the result of that stuff at all. And the teacher was like, "Oh, you have to put this nice, and you have to keep this," and da, da, da. And my daughter just shrugged and was like, "Meh." Okay. And but the thing is, she is constantly trying to learn new skills, like how to do digital art, how to do other kind of like animation, all that kind of. See, and all this is stuff that she's not working on yet. Um, yeah. How do we? So the question here from is like, it's difficult to measure effort, but we can measure results. How do we then quantify the effort? Well, that's, you start by asking them. It's like, "Oh, how much time did you spend? Like, how did you work on this? What did you do?" Because technically, what we think the effort is not really relevant. They know when they put in effort or not. Right. So and it actually becomes more of a conversation with them as a result. It's like, "Hey, like, how hard did you work on that?" "Yeah, I spent like 2 hours on it." "Oh, wow. Like, how did that feel?" "This was really hard, but I managed to do this." And so, "Oh, that's great. What are you going to do next time?" It's like, "Oh, I'm going to learn this skill because I don't know how to do that." So, "Oh, like, did you enjoy that?" "Yeah, I enjoyed doing that." "Okay, great." Right. That is the growth mindset kind of thing. And eventually they'll be able to go, "Okay, well, what can I do to learn more?" And then they'll come to you saying, "Oh, I need this to increase my skills." And the other bit of that question is like, how do we measure effort? Well, that's observing your kids a little bit more. And one of the reasons why in Passend Education we tend to do these things as peer classes, is students lead these discussions. They talk. They say what they feel, and that allows our teachers to actually observe the group, so that if we see kids that sometimes don't really like to share stuff, we can take them separately. Sometimes when kids are working on something else, say, "Hey, like, I saw you were in that conversation, and then I saw 2 points you were trying to say something, and you didn't. Why was that?" So, "Yeah, I find it difficult to talk in those situations." "Oh, okay. Well, like, do you need some help with us in the future?" And they say, "No, I'm going to try it next time." And then the next time that they actually do voice something out, you take them and say, "Hey, I saw that you got some real nice contributions. You really showed us what you felt about some stuff. That is really nice. And thank you for sharing that with us." And that language itself turns them into like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get like a little bit of positive hit on doing a behavior that is right." So that is the two things: asking them, "What did you do?" and then having the conversation about that, and then they will self-reflect on how they felt about it, or finding ways to observe them a little bit more. And I hope that answers both your questions there. Um, yeah, with that, I think that's a nice point in time to conclude where we are here. If you feel that there's some more stuff that we want to discuss, bring up in Q&As, please fill in the online form that we share with you every week. And next week, we're going to be talking a bit about play and how we use that in peer groups with kids that are 4 years old and kids that are 17 years old sometimes, like at camps. It's a lot of fun. So any questions around that, please let us know. This video will be on YouTube for you guys to see if you want to share it with your significant other. So thanks all for joining in today, and looking forward to seeing you all next week. No worries. See y'all.